Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Real Estate Development Insights podcast, where we bring you ideas, experiences, and best practices from the real estate development industry. My name is Payam Nursalihi. I'm the president of Dina Project Management, a construction and project management firm which helps developers define, design, and deliver successful projects. This is part 2 of our lessons learned episodes. We did another episode prior to this where we discussed what we've learned over the past 50 episodes and more than 50 guests on this podcast in terms of what makes some of the projects successful and why other projects fail. Just to do a quick recap of what we discussed on the previous episode. Bottom line is, if you're working in the real estate development business, if you're a developer, if you're an engineer, architect, and a professional who does this for a living, there's a very good chance that if not all, a very good chunk of what you do on a daily basis is somehow related to risk management at the beginning, in the construction, and during its life cycle. The second thing that we talked about in the previous episode was that now that we know we are in the risk management business, what is our most critical skill? What do we really need to be good at to do this properly? And the answer was effective decision-making. Not perfect decision-making, not accurate decision-making, rather effective decision-making. Timely, based on input from professionals, understanding the limitations of your decision, understanding the risks and unknowns and uncertainties about the environment that you're making decisions in. We talked about a framework that has emerged through our conversations with our guests on this podcast, and again, outside in the real life. We've tried to put together these factors into a framework of 6 different elements, which we call the development readiness model or framework. In this episode, we're going to dive deep into these 6 elements and touch on different aspects of them. Again, this is not a research, this is not a scientific method. This is just our observation and us trying to document what we're hearing and learning throughout the way, and we hope that you find it helpful as well. Please feel free to reach out and let us know what you think. As always, you can find more information about us on our website, realestatedevelopmentinsights.com, realestatedevelopmentinsights.com. And if you haven't already, please remember to subscribe. And even better, if you find this information helpful, please share it with your friends, colleagues, and network. It really helps us grow the show. Thank you and enjoy listening. Okay, so let's get into the framework itself. The way I currently think about real estate development is through these 6 pillars. Again, this is not a perfect model, it's a working model, and who knows, in maybe another 50 episodes, we come back and do another revision of these elements, but these are the 6 elements that we're going to talk about today. Number 1, local market fundamentals. Number 2, capital structure and financial feasibility. Number 3, ownership, tax, and liability structure. Number 4, design and approval strategy. Number 5, project execution and risk management, the bread and butter of our business. And number 6, the operating discipline and mindset of a developer, which we're going to touch on at the end of this episode. We're going to go through each of these pillars in this episode. So number 1, local market fundamentals. This is one of the things that, I hate to say it, but over the past decade, most of us working in industry, or at least some of us working in the industry, have forgotten how important they are, mainly because the market was so hot that it basically paid for all the mistakes that happened due to lack of consideration for the local market fundamentals. And that's not the conditions in. The hot market is not there. The conditions have changed. And unless you're extremely careful about these forces in your local conditions, there's a very good chance that your project is going to get into trouble. What are these? Based on these conversations that we've had so far, it basically comes down to knowing what you should build, not what you can build. Yes, you might have as-of-right zoning. You might be able to get the entitlement in time. You might be able to push for more. But should you build it? Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And as part of that is whatever that is tied to the local, like the physical location that your project is in. These have a very high impact on your rent, how much can you charge, the vacancy rate, which is a function of the demographic of the people and also the quality of the service that you're providing and the quality of the product that you're providing in that neighborhood. What's the growth like? Is this neighborhood on an upward trajectory of growth, especially when it comes to purpose-built rentals? And this is one of the main differences between purpose-built rentals and condo market, is that you have to think about selling the same product many, many times rather than selling it one time, which was the case of the condos. I believe Brandon Whitsett pointed this out in one of the episodes, that when you have purpose-built rental portfolio, you end up having to sell the same unit year after year, hopefully not every year, to different people, to different tenants for a very long time. So does the market in your area look good in the long term? Or is it a market that is highly seasonal? Is it a market that is being degraded and it's going down in terms of population and also appeal? So these are all the things to think about. Parking was one of the other topics that came up during our conversations. For those of you who work in the City of Toronto has made recent changes to how much parking they require from a new development, which I would say I highly applaud them for this change, because what they're basically doing is that the City of Toronto has left it to the developer's discretion to see and judge if the product they're offering would fly without any parking. If it does, if it's so close to a transit station that people don't necessarily need to have a car to get on with their lives, why would the city force them to build 2 levels of underground parking, a ton of cost, a lot of environmental impact on the surrounding neighborhood, and just quite frankly making a lot of projects unviable? Transit is another impact item. Current and future transit obviously plays a huge role. Recently, with the introduction of MTSAs and PMTSAs in Toronto and Ontario as a whole, these areas have picked up, and also reality of what it means in terms of timelines. Many of us who live or have lived in Toronto have witnessed for a long time how a single LRT project has taken many, many years to complete. So what if the project doesn't happen in the time frame that the government claims it would happen? So these are the things to think about. Customer and product fit has been one of the biggest tickets and biggest items that has come up multiple times on this podcast from different conversations. For a long time, we built units, and I think this was brought up in a conversation we had with Jacob Chong from Student JCI on one of the episodes, where he brought up that we basically for a long time were building condo units as a financial product, meaning what is the smallest size someone can afford to get a mortgage for. And that dictated what we built. And now that, again, that market has subsided a little bit, the trends has shifted. Those products, a lot of them are in trouble because they just don't fit the underserved market or segments in the market that are currently looking to buy. And these are typically the family units that are looking for 3 bedrooms, north of 1,000 square feet in a unit, multiple parking spaces, potentially, depending where they are. So product market fit, again.
We'll be right back.
Just a quick announcement. The recent changes in the City of Toronto have turned multiplexes into a very interesting opportunity and playground for new developers. To that end, we're testing interest in something new that we think will help these new developers. We're considering a small, application-only developer cohort for GTA property owners and developers to help them start a successful multiplex project in 2026. Consider it as a training camp before the Olympics. You've already decided that you want to build a multiplex. You either have the property or are able to acquire the property within the next 90 days, and you want to ensure you're in top-notch form before you put your capital at risk and start the project. If this is something of interest to you or someone else you know, please go to multiplexinvesting.com and we'll provide more information. Thank you. We have to go back to basics now that the market is not too hot. And I'm pretty sure the people who did that during the hot days of the market, they had better results. But basically, go back to the basics. Think about that. One last thing that I think is very important, and unfortunately, I see it always consistently getting underestimated and not enough attention, is the physical constraints of the actual site. It's almost always ignored to a late stage. What do I mean by that? If you have a site, especially if we're talking in the context of urban infill projects, first of all, no two sites, no two properties are the same. But there's also a good chance that because you're working in an urban environment, there are a whole bunch of different elements that will affect your construction costs, your approval costs, and timeline. The question is how much? Are there hydro lines too close to your property line? Are there servicing constraints? Is there enough juice in the power grid to feed your project? Or will you have to pay an enormous fee to bring it up to speed? In parentheses, you can't always have all those answers, by the way, but it's good to know. Easements in infill projects in urban environments are a big ticket. Unfortunately, we've seen a number of projects who got into trouble because they just looked at easements the way you would look at an easement when buying a house you want to live in. Those are two different things, and you should look at it differently. Logistics of construction. Logistics of construction. I will repeat that. Logistics of construction. The number of times we've gone into a project or we've looked at a site where just the logistics of building that project adds hundreds of thousands of dollars in costs. It's unfortunate. That's where you need to think about the whole process before you go too far down the road. And these are all real risks. These are not theories. These are conversations we've had here. And quite frankly, these are the risks I've been living through on different projects throughout the years. Pillar number 2 is the capital structure and the financial feasibility of your project. I want to start this by a quotation from one of our guests here, David Roth from Cranston Capital. And he said, quote, "We have to look at things through the lens of an investor and say, will be successful raising the capital for our pool of investors," unquote. Why does that matter? Because if you have ever been in a situation that you've tried to sell an investment to someone who has a means and capital, you probably know how deep the questions can go, how astute some of these people can be. If you're not capable or ready to respond to those questions, think about them in advance, you're probably not really clear on the risk and the pro forma of your project. At the simplest level, every single development project comes down to a spreadsheet. If the spreadsheet works, the project makes sense, it goes forward. If the spreadsheet doesn't work, the project doesn't happen. It doesn't matter what it looks like. It doesn't matter if you have the approvals or not. It doesn't matter if you're net zero sustainable or any type of other perk that you might have on your project. The pro forma doesn't work, the project's not going to happen. So make sure your pro forma is accurate. And this is very common with newer developers who don't necessarily know all the items under pro forma, and or their estimations of total costs are very unrealistic, sometimes very optimistic, and that gets them into trouble. The capital structure is one of the other items that came up multiple times during this podcast. Where is your money coming from? Is it all your equity? Are you raising money? Who are you raising money from? We've seen multiple cases of people syndicating deals throughout the past 10 years and getting into capital call environments. And when the time came that the project needed an injection, not necessarily everyone who had raised their hand initially and saying, yeah, I want to become an investor in the project, could actually afford to pay another 40, 50, 60K. And since they didn't have a real backup plan, they got in trouble. So if you're counting on others to provide you with equity, be careful what you wish for and do your homework, I guess is the point. The other item that came up, and I've dealt with this, unfortunately, very intimately, is the mechanics of financing. In other words, you can have a pro forma that works. You can have all the green lights from all the lending parties or financing parties, but the actual mechanics of when does the money come? How much do you need to spend before they're willing to release you the first draw? What type of documentations do they want to actually see before they fund you the first draw or the second draw or the third draw? How much are they going to allow you to keep as a contingency on each draw? How will they look at your holdback situations, schedule values, breakdowns, and you name it? There are multiple things that go into this category, which a lot of newer investors and developers might not necessarily be ready for. And quite honestly, if you're leveraged, these can break your project. Meaning you can have a good design, you can have a good performance that works on paper, but just because you're short $1 million or $2 million, bridging the gap where the push comes to shove, things fall apart. You don't want to be in that situation. And to that note, I would say if you're going through financing exercise, please be very precise about the ask, understand your terms. If you don't understand the terms, please make sure you get the advice from the right party and make sure you can meet them. Otherwise, you get yourself in trouble. And it's somewhat obvious, the last point I want to make here is the exit plan. With condos, it was somewhat easier. You would sell a decent size of your project ahead of time. That would kind of take care of your exit plan, so to speak. And you would move forward with your project. Purpose-built rentals, which again are the popular typology of the development these days, and probably for the next 3 to 5 years, are a little bit different. Because your sale and your payout doesn't happen up front. It happens at the very end. And not understanding the logistics and dynamics of how that works can get you in trouble. Please make sure to have a very clear understanding of how the exit plan works. Ask yourself this. If the project was already built today, what would I do to get my money back tomorrow morning? That's a good way of thinking about your plan. Mike Tyson, the famous boxing champion, has a line which I think pertains to our next pillar, the third one. He says, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And with that said, our third pillar of real estate development success is ownership, tax, and liability structure. We had an episode with Zev Zlatnik, a lawyer who has a lot of experience in real estate development deals. And he said, quote, the wrong structure can unravel your entire deal, especially once things go wrong, and they often do, unquote. And again, until you get punched in the face or the mouth, which sometimes happens, unfortunately more than you would like to admit. What are we talking about? Like we've said so far, development is a risky business. How do you deal with different types of risk, and how do you transfer them, eliminate them, mitigate them, or accept them? These are all the legal structures through your contracts, between the partners, between the LP, GP situation, between your builders and constructors and trades, lenders, and investors. Obviously, we're not giving financial or investment advice in this podcast, and you should talk to the qualified individuals. But these are some of the areas that could get you in trouble if you're not very clear on the structure and how the liability works. There are different contract types at different levels. Often we see a lot of more experienced developers having what we call supplementary conditions to some of the industry standard contracts, which is probably a good thing to do and seek legal advice for. There are tax implications, and these tax implications, especially in the past few years, have become very key because of the changes that the government is making with the HST and other forms of rebates, and they're trying to incentivize certain types of construction or construction as a whole. It's really important to understand how and when and why you would benefit or you could benefit. You don't want to build a project and then find out at the very last minute that what you had hoped to get back as a rebate on your HST does not apply because your project falls under major rental or not. That has been a case that we've heard about, especially through these smaller projects as the multiplex projects. So make sure you talk to the right parties before you go through that. And like I briefly touched on, it's always helpful to use the basic risk management framework. In risk management, there are 4 things you do with risk. You eliminate it. Let's say you have a situation where you know you're going to have, if you dig down for 2 levels of underground basement, you're going to run into groundwater. One way of dealing with that risk is eliminate it. You don't build it. You don't build that basement and still try and make that project work. And I've seen it many times that is the right call to do. In that particular example, you just don't build that basement. So you're eliminating it. You can transfer the risk. You can transfer the risk through contracts, insurances, and pretty much if you're hiring a structural engineer for your project, that's what you're doing. You're transferring the risk of the structure, and you're mandated by law to do that, to your engineer. And your engineer is on the hook. If you're a structural engineer, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Your engineer is on the hook for the well-being of your structure until the last day that building is up. You can also mitigate it, so eliminate, transfer, or mitigate. Mitigate is when you know something's going to happen. You cannot necessarily avoid it. You cannot eliminate it. You cannot transfer it. But you can do some things to make it impact the project less significantly so you can live with it. And at the end of the day, you can accept it. When you accept a certain amount of risk, you build contingency for it, you allow reserves for it, and once it comes up, you have enough options or enough means and resources to deal with it. Number 4 is design and approval strategy. I think this is one of the things that as we talk to more experienced and more seasoned developers, they have a better understanding of this. And Shaquille Walji from Share Corporation, Shaquille is someone who I respect a lot, and he's been in the industry for a long time. He said it best, quote, "You have to really understand from the beginning to the end, the entire process, the timeline, and you have to set targets. You really have to set targets." He really emphasized that point. And what do we mean by that? If I want to oversimplify it, your approval strategy is either slide or push. Slide meaning you want to go in, you want to get the least resistance possible and go as fast as possible with the approval process and try not to get bogged down. Unfortunately, when the land price goes up, that's very unlikely that you can do that. These days, the only place that I'm seeing this happen is with the multiplexes because of the push and because of the incentives that the City of Toronto is providing in this typology of buildings, and they're letting you slide to a good degree. You still might end up with cumulative adjustment, but it's reasonable. On the other end of the spectrum is push. It's helpful to think about this strategy in terms of a spectrum. No one's going to be one or the other. You're going to fall somewhere on this spectrum of slide or push. On the push side, mainly because I've seen it happen because of 2 reasons. Either you have a very expensive piece of land, which means that you have to get as much density on it as possible to be able to recoup your money and make you perform on work. Or you have a parcel of land which has to go through a very complicated approval process. And at that point, again, you want to go maximize the output and you push for it. And this has been a playing field for a lot of people who got into the game of development over the past 10 years, where all they did was to go through entitlement, get an approval, go back, push more. Get an approval, go back, push more. I know of projects where they went for a 4-story, approved, went back, asked for 8, approved, went back asked for 16, approved. Now they're asking for 30 and they're hoping, and these are 30 floors, they're hoping to get approval. Meanwhile, 16 years have passed. Nothing has been built. And with the market conditions, who knows? Maybe it takes another 15 years for them to build that 30-story building. But this is a strategy. This is a decision. Do you want to slide or do you want to push? So that's very important to think about. There are also, I want to say, sub-strategies when it comes to design aspects of the building. And by design, I not only mean anything that's architectural and is on the surface, on the cladding, which you will see on the exterior, but I also mean how the building will work over the long run, especially if you're looking at a property that you're going to hold on to it for a while, you can operate it. The decisions you make on the design side will highly affect the life cycle of your building. These could include decisions such as how you deal with the acoustics of the building. How do you select a proper structural system for your building? How do you deal with the mechanical system in the unit? Do you go centralized system, or do you go unit-specific packages? These are all design decisions that will affect the final product. And I would say there's one criteria that I want to introduce here, which is a good way of thinking about this spectrum of push and slide. And that is risk-adjusted highest and best use. If you ever worked with an urban planner, you've probably heard the highest and best use report scenario, which basically, from a planning perspective, they can tell you what is the highest and best use of a particular property. That being said, I would like to look at it from a risk-adjusted perspective. Many years ago, I was part of a project where we had spent years getting the building to a very decent mid-rise building size. And we're probably about a couple months away from pulling a permit and starting construction. We got a call from someone at the planning department in the city saying, listen, the such and such regulation just changed, as of yesterday, very recent. And now, instead of doing a mid-rise building on that parcel of land, you can do a high-rise, basically and effectively more than double the density and the GFA that you could get on that site. And this is after many years of going through the approvals, having all the permits, having all the drawings, having all the tenders. We're ready to start construction in 2 months. The decision at that point was for the developer, our client, to think, okay, do I want to reset this thing, go through the approval process, push it again, go through the pricing, go through the design for another 3 years and build the high rise? Or am I okay with doing what I've already set out to do and not take the risk of having to deal with the unknowns that are still out there? Eventually, the choice was to build the mid-rise and not go for the risk, and which I think personally was the right choice to do. And that's a prime example of risk-adjusted highest and best use. So bigger, taller, more dense is not necessarily the best choice always, especially, and this is a side note, especially if you're talking about pushing through thresholds where the building complexity changes. Talk about 7th floor, and if you want to know more, reach out to me. We can have a conversation. 7th floor in the current context of our built environment is a very complicated one. Last but not least, this is very important from my perspective, the team's experience. Development team, the design team, the construction team. Again, this development is a team sport. Their experience with this exact particular type of building that you want to build, with the process that you want to go through, can be make or break for your project. My best advice would be to choose people who have either done exactly what you're trying to do or have knowledge and experience in the very close vicinity of what you want to do. And that leads me to another point that I've seen this time and time again, that having the right team will save you hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in the design and approval stages because of their exposure to other projects that are similar to yours. And they know what's going on. They know the latest and greatest in the legal and approval system and environment, and they can provide you feedback that you cannot necessarily find on the internet or in the media. So having the right team as part of your design and approval strategy is very key from my perspective. Number 5, project execution and risk management. I want to start this one with a quote from Maziar Mortazavi from Tax and Liability. He said, quote, "Every developer is very wealthy on an Excel spreadsheet, but you put all of that at risk the moment you put a shovel in the ground." Many would agree that the construction phase is the most risky part of any development process. The reason is the minute the shovel hits the ground, a lot of decisions that you've made so far up to that point are irreversible or very expensive to change. So once you get into execution, things get real, and you need to make sure you have done your homework up to that point, but you also have proper systems and processes in place to make sure what you've planned for can actually happen. Again, these come in different forms in terms of contracts, checklists, quality assurances, quality controls. Construction is a risky process. How do we deal with it? We plan for it as much as possible with the right team. We just talked about the importance of having the right team. Planning is another part. And by planning, I mean an extended pre-construction phase, which is one of the key things we always advocate for. As much as possible, try and spend time on design from a technical perspective, at least make sure your team has that time and luxury to do that. And it saves you hundreds of thousands and months of time on the project, which again translates into money. One of the common mistakes that we've seen that happen with newer and less experienced developers is that they go for the lowest prices. And I know that sounds like cliche. Trust me, I don't enjoy saying it again. But if you're cutting the contract for an engineer, for an architect to the bones to get it to the cheapest price they can possibly physically do, there's a very good chance that they're going to miss stuff because they didn't have allowance to dig into it too deep. They're going to make mistakes because they didn't have a proper amount of time allocated so they can review everything. And they got rushed. And those missed things end up costing you multiple times of what you just saved during the construction phase. And this is one of the biggest takeaways that I've had working as a construction manager, is that the more you spend time and resources on the pre-con segment, the less are the chances of real big problems during construction. You want to plan things out. Same for the trades. We have this conversation far too often with some newer developers that you tender something, someone comes in 30% less than everyone else on that tender set. My automatic response would be just to disqualify them, because probably if everyone else is in the same ballpark within 5%, 10%, which is normal, and someone you have that is like 30% lower than everyone else, there's a very good chance they're not understanding what they're pricing. They will get you in trouble. Especially these days, there's a good chance that they will either claim for a lot of extras or, unfortunately, which is also very common these days, go out of business. Unfortunately, this happens more than you think. So please make sure to think about that. And if you're talking about proprietary systems in your buildings, if you're buying something that only one supplier can provide, be wary of lead times, be wary of deposits and financing structures. They can all be very significant hurdles if you're not paying attention. Number 6, and the last one on this framework, is the operating discipline and the mindset. What do I mean by that? We talked about the importance of decision making, but the other thing that is very important for you as a developer is to understand that you bring the weather. What do I mean? As the developer, if you're the one who's advocating and you're proponent for the project, if you're someone who's leading the team, you bring the weather. If you're shaky, if you're uncomfortable in the position you're in, if you're not necessarily sold on your own project, trust me, it shows. And your team, your consultants, your builders, your trades all feel that. And the minute that gets out there, you're bound to have issues. Let's put it nicely. You're bound to have issues. So you need to make sure, first of all, you're sold on your own project. Second of all, you're confident enough in the role you're playing and the product that you can lead the team effectively. If you can't, that's okay. Make sure you have the right people around you who can give you that confidence in those meetings, in those conversations, to be able to bring a good weather, a sunny weather to the project. Otherwise, there's going to be always overcast on your project. It doesn't feel good. It won't work good. It's a team sport. This is a team sport, meaning you need a decent team. It can get overwhelming. I know at the beginning, it's just you and a parcel of land, but as you go, you need to build a team. There are a million decisions that you need to be dealing with, and there are too many things that can fall through the cracks and cause problems. Make sure you have a good team around you. The other point here is, and I recently heard this through another podcast, someone said, problems are a feature, not a bug. I think it's very important for a new developer to think about their journey in this way. You're going to have troubles every day, almost guaranteed on a development project, especially during construction. Hopefully less, not more, but you will have problems. And if you can't react properly to those problems, you're the bottleneck. You're going to become the risk source. So you have to appreciate that the problems are the feature of this journey, not a bug. So be ready to deal with it. And why do I say it's a feature? Because it means a lot of other people are not going to do what you've set out to do. It's a complicated process. It's hard, and it filters out those who are not supposed to be doing this. Last point here, I was trying to summarize one of my experiences with one of my favorite clients from about 10 years ago. And I came up with this formula, the 4, 6, 7, 10 formula. 4, 6, 7, 10 formula. And it's summarized in being obsessed with your project. Being obsessed with your project. I repeat that. It doesn't mean micromanaging, but it means being obsessed. The most successful real estate developers that I've had the privilege of working with are obsessed with their project. They go to bed thinking about their project. They go to bed thinking about their layouts, the light in the corner unit, how it reflects, the noise in the bottom unit, how it travels. And why the 4, 6, 7, 10 formula? Because I had a client where he would send me an email at 4 a.m., having thought about something overnight. He would send me an email at 4 a.m. saying, here's a thing, I've thought about it, I think there's a chance that there's a risk here or there's an improvement we can make in this aspect. About 6 a.m., he would send me a text saying, I've sent you an email. About 7 a.m., he knew my routine that I was driving to work. About 7 a.m., he would actually call me to discuss the idea further, having ensured that I've already seen his email because he sent me a text earlier. And while I was driving, we would come up with an initial game plan. And by 10 a.m., we'd have a meeting with the relevant parties or a conference call or virtual call with the relevant parties that could help solve that problem or create that improvement into the project. And basically by 10, we would have a conclusion. Either that was a thing or it was not a thing, and it would let it go and would go on with the rest of the day. And quite frankly, as long as I worked with that particular client, this pattern repeated many times every week. Some might say this is micromanaging, and they might be right. I would look at it, I would say being obsessed with the project, because that one person in the shoe of the developer, in the role of a developer, brings the weather. They push for it. No one else should and is expected to know the project as well as them or feel responsible for it as much as they should. So 4, 6, 7, 10, that was a formula. I like it. It's going to be annoying at times, but it gets things done. And from my perspective, that's why we're here. You might be asking yourself, am I trying to scare you away from the development game? The answer is maybe. Maybe I am. For years, our operating framework has been that we need an army of small developers to help solve Canada's housing crisis. That has been our operating framework for a number of years now. But to be clear, we need a well-equipped, capable army of developers. And the last thing we want is to have a lot of casualties just because they didn't know what they're doing. And that's why we're doing this podcast. That's why we're sharing all these lessons. And I'm hoping that you find this conversation is helpful. And if you do, please let us know if there are items that you think we should have included in this framework or don't agree with the ones that we've included so far. Please let us know. We're happy to learn about it. We're easily found on specifically LinkedIn. And thank you for listening. Please remember to share this with your friends, colleagues, and family if you found it informative. Talk to you soon. Thank you. Just one last thing before you leave, please make sure to visit our website. We have put together a whole bunch of different resources that you can download for free from our website. These include checklists, manuals, and also access to previous webinars. In case you have missed any of our previous webinars, you can go there, get the replay link, download the slides, and benefit from all these free resources that we've gathered on the website. Please make sure to visit. Thank you.